The ninth unit of microeconomics is the consumer behavior. This chapter includes the introduction, law of equimarginal utility, assumptions, criticisms, and practical importance, concept of consumer surplus. What is consumer behavior? This unit introduces you to the concept of equimarginal utility and consumer surplus based on the daily experience of all human beings. From the earlier study of law of diminishing marginal utility, we all know that if consumer goes on spending more and more on a particular commodity, its marginal utility diminishes. Therefore, in order to maximize his satisfaction, consumer has to spend his income on various goods. This law is called in different names. This law is also called the law of maximum satisfaction, the law of substitution. According to this law, a consumer can allocate his resources on the particular commodity in which he gets more satisfaction and he continues for the consumption. Law of equimarginal utility. It is just an extension of law of diminishing marginal utility. This law is based on one of the important characteristics of human wants, namely wants are substitutable. The law of diminishing marginal utility gives an explanation with regard to the consumption of a consumer. Actually, human beings demand more than one commodity at a time. Marshall explained how maximization of satisfaction is possible by allocating his limited income on various commodities through the law of equimarginal utility. Gosson was the first economist who formulated the law, but this law is popular with the name of Alfred Marshall. Every consumer has unlimited wants, but the money income available at his disposal at any time is limited. The consumer will so allocate his given income on various purchases as to get maximum level of satisfaction. For this, he will compare the marginal utilities of the different commodity he wants to buy and also the marginal utility of each commodity to its price. If he finds that marginal utility of good A is higher than that of good B, he will substitute the former for the latter till their marginal utilities are equalized. Since each commodity has a price of its own, the consumer will so allocate his budget on food, clothing, recreation and medical care, etc., that the last rupee spent on each good or service gives him the same marginal utility. If the last rupee spent on good A gives him less marginal utility, he will withdraw this amount from A and spend it on good B. If this given him higher marginal utility, the consumer will thus goes on substituting one good with a higher marginal utility for another good with a lower marginal utility till the marginal utility of each commodity is in proportion to its prices and the ratio of all goods is equal to the ratio of their marginal utilities. This is known as the proportionality rule, which sets the conditions of consumer equilibrium as MUX, which is equal to MUY, which is equal to MUZ, which is equal to K into PX into PY into PZ. This law can be explained with the help of an example. Let us suppose the consumer has a fixed income of 5 rupees and he wants to spend it on idlis and vadas. When our consumer spends his entire income of 5 rupees either on idlis or on vadas, the marginal utility he derives is given in this table. In the above table, it is shown that when consumer spends his entire income of rupees 5 either on idli or on vada, how much marginal utility the consumer is going to derive. If our consumer spent his entire income on idlis, he will get 40 units of total utility. So as if he spends his entire income on vadas, he will get 30 units of marginal utility. If consumer spent his entire income in this way, he will not maximize his satisfaction. Therefore, in order to maximize the satisfaction, consumer has to spend more rupees on idlis and some other rupees on vadas. If he spends rupees 3 on idlis and 2 on vadas, the consumer derives total utility which is equal to 16 from idlis and 12 from vadas, which is equal to 18. And it has to be added up with 10 plus 8, that is 10 with that of idlis and 8 with that of vadas, which is equal to 36 plus 18, which is equal to 54 units. This is an ideal combination of the consumer. Like, he should know the combination of spending is rupee on both the commodity. He secures maximum satisfaction from his combination. No other combination of idli and vada will not give him 54 units of satisfaction. If consumer instead selecting the combination, if he spent only rupees 2 on idlis and 3 on vadas, he will lose 2 units. That means he will be getting only 52 units. When the consumer spent rupees 3 on idlis and 2 on vadas, the marginal utility of two goods is also the same. You should concentrate that the marginal utility derived from both the commodities should be the same. Only then we can say that it is the law of equimarginal utility. It is also based on some of the important assumptions. The first one, the consumer is rational economic man who seeks maximum satisfaction. Second one, utility is measurable in cardinal terms. Third one, prices of two goods are unchanged. Fourth one, income of the consumer is fixed. Fifth one, marginal utility of money is constant. Sixth one, the wants and goods are substitutable. Let us understand the limitations and practical importance of law of equimarginal utility. This law has some limitations. They are: it is assumed that the consumer has a perfect knowledge of the alternative choices open to him. In reality, most of the consumers are ignorant about other useful alternatives on which they could spend their income. This means the act of substitution difficult and the law is operative. It is assumed that all quantities like utilities, goods, income, etc. are fully divisible. This is again unrealistic assumption in the smooth functioning of the law. Though money and utility may be divided according to the convenience of the consumer, it is not possible to divide all goods in small quantities. There are certain commodity which cannot be divided in small bits, for example, tractor. The alternatives open to the consumer are also assumed to be certain, but consumer choices are uncertain and even risky. Another assumption of law is the rationality in allocating his given money income on goods of his choice. He is expected to be a calculating mind and capable of weighing the utilities of the commodities in a fine manner. But man is not a calculating machine. Always he will not weigh price and marginal utility while purchasing the goods. It assumes the marginal utility of money remains constant, but this is not true. This law also criticized for its unrealistic assumptions. This law is also criticized for its unrealistic assumption. This law has more practical importance in the following areas. It is useful in the area of consumption. It indicates how to get maximum satisfaction. With the help of the principle of substitution, the consumer is able to make the best choice of his wants to gain maximum total satisfaction. It is useful in the areas of production also. To the producer, this law is useful because the principle of substitution lies in the optimum allocation of resources. The producer can have optimal combination factors of production when the last unit of investment expenditure brings equal productivity of all the factors of production. It is useful in the area of exchange. This principle has an important bearing on the determination of value. This law is extensively used in the area of distribution. The general theory of distribution. Modern states are welfare state and they aim at the maximization of social benefits in their revenue and expenditure activities. This involves the principles of substitution. In distribution rewards of the various factors production, their shares are determined by the principle of marginal productivity. An optimal distribution is based on the marginal productivity of factors, and the factors tends to change their uses till their marginal productivity is equalized. This is how this law is applicable. Principle of maximum social advantage involves the law of substitution. Now, it's time to understand the consumer's surplus. The concept of consumer surplus occupies an important place in Marshallian concept of welfare economic analysis. The concept of consumer surplus was first coined by French economist Dupet in the year 1844. He developed his concept to measure the benefits of public goods like roads, canals, bridges, parks, etc. But it was popularized and developed by Professor Alfred Marshall in his Principles of Economics, published in the year 1890. Marshall points out that the utility which a consumer derives from the purchase of a commodity exceeds the money value he pays for it. This excess of satisfaction is called consumer surplus. Marshall concept was based on the cardinal measurability and interpersonal comparison of the utility. It is very important concept in economic theory like theory of demand and welfare economics. Professor Alfred Marshall has said the doctrine of consumer surplus is the excess of the price which a consumer would be willing to pay rather than go without the thing over that which he actually does pay. Professor Alfred Marshall explains consumer surplus as when a consumer buys a commodity, his satisfaction derived from it may be in excess of the dissatisfaction he has experienced in parting with money for paying its price. The excess satisfaction is called the consumer surplus. A consumer is willing to pay the price of a commodity up to its marginal utility compared with the marginal utility of money which he has to pay. If the marginal utility of a commodity is high while its actual market price is low, the consumer derives extra satisfaction, and this extra satisfaction is consumer surplus. Therefore, consumer surplus can be measured as the difference between the maximum price the consumer is willing to pay for a commodity and the actual market price of the commodity. The concept of consumer surplus is based on law of diminishing marginal utility. The consumer is prepared to pay the price equal to its marginal utility. According to the law of diminishing marginal utility, as the consumption of a particular commodity increases, the marginal utility diminishes. So the price one is prepared to pay also declines. This is mainly because the consumer is prepared to pay the price equal to its potential price. As the price of a commodity in the market is determined by the marginal utility, consumer surplus can also be measured as the difference between total utility and the total exchange value. Doctrine of consumer surplus can be explained with so many examples. One example is a consumer who is fond of apple is ready to pay 90 rupees for first unit and 70 rupees for second apple and 60 rupees for the third apple and so on. Here we should note that the consumer is ready to pay lower price for the successive events of apple. This is due to the application of law of diminishing marginal utility. According to the above table, when the consumer purchases the first unit of the apple, he is ready to pay 90 rupees, but he pays only the market price, that is 20 rupees. So he gets a surplus utility that is equal to 70 units. When he purchases the second unit of apple, he is ready to pay 70 rupees because he gets 70 minus 20, which is equal to 50 units of surplus. When he buys the third unit of apple, he gets a surplus because 60 minus 20, which is equal to 40 units of surplus for the fourth unit of apple. He is ready to pay 40 rupees and get surplus, that is 40 minus 20, which is equal to 20 units, which is equal to market price. The total consumer surplus in purchasing 4 units of apple is 70 plus 50 plus 40 plus 20, which is equal to 180 units. This law or the consumer surplus is based on assumptions. Consumer surplus is based on some of the important assumptions. First one, utility can be measured. Utility derived from the consumption of a particular commodity can be measured with exact numbers. There is no substitute for the commodity is one important assumption. Marginal utility of the commodity diminishes. Marginal utility of money remains constant. Each commodity is independent. Fashion, taste remains constant. Income and prices are given. What are the significance and the criticisms of consumer surplus? The concept of consumer surplus has been criticized by critics. Though the doctrine of consumer surplus is of great theoretical and practical importance, it has some shortcomings. Critics described it as imaginary and unrealistic. Most of the criticizers are commented on the measurement of utility under consumer surplus. The important criticisms of the concept are: doctrine of consumer surplus is based on unrealistic assumptions like utility is measurable, marginal utility of money remaining constant, commodity has no substitute, but all these assumptions are not real. It is also criticized that since utility is subjective and psychological concept, it cannot be measured in terms of cardinal numbers. In spite of these limitations, doctrine of consumer surplus has practical importance. The third one is the doctrine of consumer surplus neglects the income effect of the change in price. The maximum amount which a person can pay for a commodity or for a group of commodity is limited by the amount of his money income, and the total sum of money actually spent by consumer on the goods and services cannot be greater than the amount of his money income. So a person can be prepared to pay for number of goods and services he purchase and enjoy cannot be greater than the amount of his money income. It is meaningless to apply the doctrine of consumer surplus to the necessaries of life, as the utility derived from necessaries of life is infinite. It is argued that Marshall's idea of consumer surplus is not applicable to luxuries and necessaries of life. The utility of luxuries and prestigious goods like demand depends upon the prevalence of high price. If price were low, utility of these goods would disappear and surplus also disappears. Regarding the bare necessities of life like water, utility will be very high, while their marketplace prices are low due to their abundant supply. For example, a thirsty rich man stranded in a desert may be prepared to pay 1000 rupees for a glass of water, although he might get it for next to nothing. Here, water is necessary for existence. Its consumption does not yield any positive satisfaction, but the absence of the same will be infinitely painful. In such cases, the surplus is a sort of negative element. Thus, the concept of consumer surplus does not apply to bare necessities of life. This concept is imaginary and illusory. It does not exist in reality. Consumer derives surplus satisfaction out of his imagination. Consumers have option to purchase less or more of a commodity. In the case of rare commodity, they purchase less. It is said that consumer surplus applies to normally traded, independent and unimportant commodity. This doctrine has also been criticized as it has no practical significance. According to Professor Little, the doctrine of consumer surplus is a useless theoretical toy having no practical significance. I conclude this unit by saying the concept of consumer surplus has more practical significance. Usually, all people in the society experience this type of surplus satisfaction knowingly or unknowingly. But it is an imaginary concept. According to Marshall, consumer surplus is the difference between willing to pay the price and the existing market prices. The amount of satisfaction derived by the consumer generally exceeds the amount of sacrifice he makes. Marshall calls this excess satisfaction as consumer surplus. It is based on cardinal measurability. Thank you.